She was only 12 years old. Forced into marriage, betrayed by everyone who should have protected her, her body and childhood were stolen, all for power. What happened next will shock you. The room is heavy with the coppery scent of blood, and the firelight flickers across walls lined with cold stone. A child, no more than 12, writhes on the narrow bed, her small body trembling with pain that should not exist for someone so young. The midwife's hands are slick and trembling as she works desperately to bring a tiny life into the world, and every strained breath from the girl cuts through the thick silence like a knife. Around her the adults pace, whispering prayers that feel powerless, their faces pale, etched with fear. The child screams, not in anger or defiance, but in a pure, instinctive terror of her own body betraying her. Her limbs flail weakly, the quilt pulled tight beneath her, soaked in sweat and something darker, heavier. Time stretches and the air seems to freeze, broken only by her cries and the soft clatter of tools on the table. Every minute that passes carries the weight of inevitability, the knowledge that what is happening is unnatural, cruel, and irreversible. No history book will pause to describe the terror in her eyes, the way her body twists in pain too vast for her years. And in this frozen, agonizing moment, there is a clarity so sharp it cuts through centuries. This should never have happened to a child. The truth is simple, brutal, and undeniable. And it is here, in the shadows of Pembroke Castle on a bitter winter's night, that the story of a girl who would become England's most powerful woman begins. Not with triumph, but with unimaginable suffering. Most people think they know history. They picture kings and queens in glittering halls, battles won or lost, and dynasties rising with glory. But the truth rarely appears in these stories. History has a way of polishing the past, turning real people into legends, and, in the process, erasing the suffering that made those legends possible. This is not a tale of heroism or noble triumph. It is the story that power tried to bury, the one that exposes greed, cruelty, and silence. The child in that cold castle room, whose body was sacrificed for ambition, was not a footnote. She was real. She was 12 years old, and the adults around her, royalty, nobles, priests, did not protect her. Instead, they orchestrated her fate, handing her from one powerful hand to another as if she were property, not a person. For centuries, her story was rewritten, softened, or forgotten entirely. She became a figure of admiration, a matriarch of dynasties, a symbol of strength. But what the records rarely tell you is that strength was born from trauma, from suffering that left scars no crown could erase. This story is an exposure, not a tribute. It strips away the romance, the gilded pages of history books, and lays bare what really happened. It confronts you with a truth that many find uncomfortable. The foundations of power are often built on the suffering of the powerless, and legends can hide horrors too terrible to ignore. What you are about to hear is the story history tried to sanitize, the story of a child betrayed by the world she should have been able to trust. Before the pain, before the betrayals, there was a moment when she was just a child. Innocent, fragile, unaware of the cruelty waiting for her. Born into a world that valued her not for who she was, but for what she could bring to others. Her first cries did not belong to her. They belonged to the ambitions of men who saw in her a future of wealth, power, and alliances. From the very beginning, she was treated as an asset, a fragile vessel carrying promises of inheritance and influence. Her early days were spent under the watchful eyes of those who should have loved her without expectation. She learned to walk and speak, to smile and reach for the world, never realizing that every step, every word, every innocent laugh was being catalogued, evaluated, and measured for its usefulness to the adults around her. Her small hands, once free to clutch toys or explore the garden, were instead guided, taught to serve a future she could not yet comprehend. Her mind was sharp, her intelligence noticed even by those who sought to control her. She learned languages, read texts far beyond her years, and yet despite the gifts and care that might have nurtured a normal childhood, every lesson, every gift, every moment of attention was shadowed by a looming reality. She belonged to a system that valued power over protection. Even at this young age, her fate had been decided. written in contracts and decrees, and sealed by the ambitions of men who would never see her as a child. The innocence of her early life was a fragile veneer, soon to be shattered in ways that would define her entire existence. As she grew, the world around her revealed its true nature. Every authority figure, every relative, every figure of trust was complicit in shaping a future that would harm her. Her family's ambition was relentless, pushing her toward alliances and marriages that served estates and crowns rather than her well-being. Kings and nobles intervened with the cold precision of chess players, moving her life across the board without asking what she wanted or needed. The church, which should have offered guidance and protection, instead offered dispensations, blessings and silence, all in service of power, wealth and political convenience. Everyone who could have stepped in chose inaction, or worse, encouraged her exploitation. This was not negligence born of ignorance. It was deliberate, calculated and avoidable. Even in medieval society, where child marriages occurred, there were limits understood by the people of the time. They knew the dangers, the risks to a young girl's body and mind, yet they chose ambition over care. She was being molded into an instrument of convenience, her health, her innocence, and her autonomy traded like currency. Every contract signed, every ceremony performed, every blessing offered by a priest or nod from a king reinforced a single truth. Her life was not hers to live. The adults around her failed spectacularly, and their failure was systemic. It was not a single person who harmed her, but the combined weight of authority, greed, and silence. In a world where she should have been protected, she was instead corralled, controlled, and prepared for a trauma that would define her, illustrating that sometimes the system itself is the enemy. Her childhood ended in an instant, with a cruelty that should never have existed. She was 12, barely a child, when the adults around her forced her into a marriage not for love, care, or protection, but for wealth, status, and political advantage. Within days, the man twice her age took what should never have been his to claim. Her small, fragile body endured acts she could not consent to, could not understand, and could not survive without suffering. Pain tore through her, nerves screaming, body trembling under a weight no child should bear. She screamed, not in defiance, but in pure terror as her innocence was stolen. Those who could have intervened, the king, nobles, and clergy, looked away or approved the act, complicit in the crime. This was not tradition, it was violence. It was the deliberate choice of powerful adults to sacrifice a child for personal gain. The imbalance of power was total, a child alone against men who saw her as property, a vessel to secure fortunes. The betrayal did not end that night. It echoed through every hour, shaping her body, mind, and future. This was the turning point when innocence was crushed and a life of suffering began. A suffering that would later forge strength and resilience, yet leave scars that would never heal. Every system that should have protected her failed, and in that failure a child's life was broken to serve ambition. This is the moment that changed everything, planting seeds of pain, power, and survival that would define the rest of her life. Her childhood ended in an instant, with a cruelty that should never have existed. She was 12, barely a child, when the adults around her forced her into a marriage not for love, care, or protection, but for wealth, status, and political advantage. Within days, the man twice her age took what should never have been his to claim. Her small, fragile body endured acts she could not consent to, could not understand, and could not survive without suffering. Pain tore through her, nerves screaming, body trembling under a weight no kid should bear. She screamed, not in defiance, but in pure terror as her innocence was stolen. Those who could have intervened, the king, nobles, and clergy, looked away or approved the act, complicit in the crime. Tias was not tradition, it was violence. It was the deliberate choice of powerful adults to sacrifice a child for personal gain. The imbalance of power was total, a child alone against men who saw her as property, a vessel to secure fortunes. The betrayal did not end that night. It echoed through every hour, shaping her body, mind, and future. This was the turning point when innocence was crushed and a life of suffering began, a suffering that would later forge strength and resilience, yet leave scars that would never heal. Every system that should have protected her failed, and in that failure, a child's life was broken to serve ambition. This is the moment that changed everything, planting seeds of pain, power, and survival that would define the rest of her life. The suffering she endured left more than physical scars. It reshaped her mind, her emotions, and her very sense of self. The terror, helplessness, and betrayal of her childhood imprinted on her psyche, teaching lessons no child should ever have to learn. She quickly realized that the world would not protect her, that those meant to love and guide her were willing to trade her safety for power and profit. Fear became a constant companion, and control, the illusion or exertion of it, became her refuge. She learned to read people, to anticipate danger, and to navigate treacherous political waters that no 12-year-old should have to consider. The innocence she once possessed was replaced by vigilance. Her laughter faded into caution, and her trust became a precious and guarded commodity. Yet, from this crucible of trauma, a transformation began. The broken child learned to survive, to adapt, and to wield the very systems that had betrayed her. Pain, fear, and suffering became teachers, forging intelligence, resilience, and an understanding of power few could match. The girl who had been victimized began to see opportunity where others saw vulnerability. The experience that should have destroyed her became a catalyst, teaching her that strength is born not from safety, but from the ability to endure and outthink those who seek to control you. Every choice, every alliance, every calculated move in her later life was informed by lessons learned in fear, trauma, and violation. From the ruins of her childhood, a survivor emerged, cautious, determined, and beginning the slow ascent toward becoming one of England's most formidable women. From the shadows of her suffering, she began to rise. The child who had been broken and betrayed learned to turn her trauma into power, using the lessons of fear, pain, and betrayal to navigate a world built on ambition and deceit. Her intelligence, honed in secrecy and observation, became her sharpest weapon. She understood alliances, influence, and the politics of survival in a way that few could match because she had no choice but to learn them young. She married strategically, formed bonds that would strengthen her position, and cultivated loyalty from those around her. Every decision was calculated, every word measured, and every action designed to secure not only her safety, but her authority. What might have crushed another person instead became the foundation of her ascent. The cruelty inflicted upon her, the violence and disregard for her life, shaped a survivor who would command respect, fear, and admiration. Her rise was not in spite of her trauma, it was because of it. The pain taught her strategy, the betrayal taught her caution, and the fear taught her foresight. In time, she transformed from a powerless victim into a woman who wielded influence over kings, courted nobles, and became a master of the political games that had once ensnared her. Each victory, each moment of control, was both a reclamation and a demonstration. She would no longer be used, silenced, or overlooked. She became England's most powerful woman, a figure whose strength was inseparable from the suffering that had forged her. Power, when earned in fire, is unshakable, and she had been forged in the hottest of flames. Even after rising to power, she could not escape the systems that had once destroyed her. She watched, helpless and haunted, as a younger generation faced the same dangers she had endured. Girls under her care were still treated as property, their bodies traded for alliances, their innocence sacrificed for ambition. She knew the consequences because she had lived them, and she tried to intervene, to shield them from the cruelty that had marked her own childhood. But power alone could not dismantle centuries of entrenched practices. Even her authority had limits in a world ruled by men who valued lineage, wealth, and influence over safety and humanity. Time and again, she witnessed promises broken, warnings ignored, and children thrust into circumstances she recognized as horrific. The cruelty of the system was relentless, and even survivors like her could not fully stop it. She understood that trauma did not end with her own life. It could ripple across generations, shaping futures in ways she could not control. Her attempts to protect, to change, to warn were often frustrated by the very structures that had built her power, leaving her in a painful paradox. The woman who had conquered adversity could not shield the next child from suffering. This cycle of exploitation, of innocence sacrificed for ambition, demonstrated the harsh truth of her world. Strength, intelligence, and influence could secure survival for herself, but they could not rewrite the system. Even the most powerful survivors remain, in some ways, prisoners of the same forces that once enslaved them, trapped in a cycle that continues long after the original crime. Margaret's story is not just a relic of medieval cruelty. It is a mirror reflecting a problem that persists today. Child exploitation, forced marriages, and the abuse of power are not confined to history books. They continue in countless places around the world. The adults who once failed her, prioritizing wealth and status over a child's life, echo in modern systems that still protect abusers and sacrifice the vulnerable. By examining her life honestly, we confront a truth that many would prefer to ignore. The suffering of children is often invisible, dismissed, or rationalized for convenience. Her survival, her rise to power, and her achievements do not erase the trauma she endured. They highlight it. They remind us that strength can be born from adversity, but that strength alone is not enough to stop cycles of abuse. This is why her story matters, why it demands attention, and why we cannot sanitize it for comfort. Understanding the reality behind her triumph forces us to question the structures around us, the way power can shield wrongdoing, and the ways society continues to fail its most vulnerable. By remembering Margaret not only as a powerful woman, but as the child who was sacrificed, we are challenged to act, to protect, and to demand accountability. Her life is a testament to resilience, yes, but it is also a warning. The consequences of ignoring abuse are long-lasting, systemic, and often repeated. History has lessons to teach, but only if we are willing to face them, unflinching, and to recognize that what happened to her is never truly just history. The damage done to her body was immediate, catastrophic, and permanent. A child's body is not meant to bear the weight of pregnancy, and yet at 12, she endured a pain and strain that would leave marks she could never forget. Her pelvis, too narrow, her muscles too weak, her organs too fragile, every part of her was forced into a process meant for a fully grown woman. The birth left her broken in ways no crown or title could repair. She suffered tears and internal injuries that would prevent her from bearing more children. Chronic pain that would shadow her every movement, and a body forever altered by a single act of cruelty. Survival was not recovery. Every step she took reminded her of the night her innocence was stolen and her violated. Even the simplest daily tasks became reminders of the abuse her frame had endured. Modern medicine can describe the devastation, but nothing could lessen the trauma she carried in her bones and sinew. And yet, despite the damage, she learned to carry herself with a dignity and poise that concealed the depth of her suffering. Every achievement, every act of leadership, every step toward power was layered atop the foundation of a child's broken body. Her physical scars were invisible to the outside world, yet they shaped her decisions, her fears, and her understanding of those who held authority. The pain she endured became both a burden and a crucible, forging a resilience that would define her life and lay the groundwork for the power she would one day wield over England itself. The story comes full circle, returning to the moment that should never have happened. Imagine her small body, trembling, screaming in a cold stone chamber, alone except for those who were supposed to protect her, but did not. That day, her childhood was destroyed, her innocence stolen, and her body forever changed. The silence that follows is deafening, a world that stood by as a child was sacrificed, a world that allowed ambition to triumph over humanity. And yet, even in her survival, there is no comfort, no absolution. The pain she endured lingers through the centuries, echoing in every account that sanitizes her suffering, every portrait that glorifies her later life while ignoring the horrors that shaped it. Her legacy is double-edged, strength and power forged from trauma, triumph shadowed by violation. When we remember her, we must remember both sides, the queen who influenced England and the child who nearly died. Every crown, every dynasty, every historical triumph was built on her resilience, but also on her suffering. This is the echo of her story, the resonance of a life begun in agony and injustice, a reminder that history often celebrates survival while forgetting the cost. And so we return to that cold chamber, that frightened girl, and the truth remains undeniable. She was 12. 12. And what was done to her was wrong. No title, no legend, no dynasty can erase that fact. Every time we recount her story, we must hear that echo, feel that agony, and never forget that the child came first, and she deserved better.